Alright, so I'm going to tell you everything that we've learned, or kind of everything that we learned in our EDCI 6, 7, 10 class. So week one, we learned about learning targets, and a learning target is it's similar to a lesson objective, but the difference is that a learning target is more student friendly. So it's used in the language in a using language students can understand, and it gives them like expectations of this is what we're going to do, this is why you're gonna do it, and it becomes more meaningful for them. So with a learning target, the instruction is more effective, and the learning becomes more meaningful, in a way that it's going to increase student achievement because they become more engaged during the lessons and empowered of their own learning. Is that gonna make sense? Yeah, okay. So the week one we were presented with 9 action points in the learning theory. The first one was that learning target is the first principle of meaningful learning and effective teaching. Now that means that that's kind of like the most important thing in the lesson. It tells the teacher and the students, this is what we're going to do today, and this is why we're going to do it. Two is the lesson should serve a purpose towards a larger learning goal. That means that, like, for example, in math, we have units or chapters where each one has anywhere between 4 or 8 different lessons. So for this, each of the lessons needs to have a purpose towards their bigger objective for the entire lesson. Kind of like if I'm saying the objective for one lesson is or the learning target is to solve multi-step equations, then we need to start with solving 1 step, solving 2 steps, solving questions with variables on both sides, so that we can get to multi-step at the end, which would be like the larger goal. The third point is teacher and student aim for the learning target during the lesson. That kind of means to me that everything that happens in the lesson has to play a part in the learning target. So it's towards that point. It's not just, oh, we got time, so let's do it, why not? Every lesson needs a performance of understanding. That is like a learning experience that lets the students know, oh, I am kind of understanding this. And the teacher lets them know where they're at and gives them like evidence. So I think of it like a formative assessment, like an exit ticket or a think by share, things that can give you automatic feedback as to where the students are in the lesson. The fifth point is teachers and students partner in a formative learning cycle. That means that teachers give students, all the what do you call them? The learning objectives and what is expected of them for the lesson, and then they're given formative assessment like a quiz or something like that. After that, the students receive some feedback, and then they use that feedback to work on what they need to work so that they can move towards their achieving the learning target for the unit or the lesson. The next one is specific, appropriate, and challenging goals for students. And those are just students setting up a goal, and that could either be short-term, long-term, depending on what they want, but it has to be towards their own education and, not education, but towards their own learning target so that they can get there, what they're gonna do to get there. Developing self-assessment capable students, which basically says that students are engaged in their lesson and in their own learning by assessing themselves and becoming like students who have a can-do attitude, like they're motivated to learn. And the last two, 8 and 9, are basically, they talk about the school overall. Like number 8 says that what students do during the lesson is the yardstick for school improvement. So that's basically saying what happens in the classroom is a reflection of the school overall. And the last one is that everyone in the school is involved in this. It's not just the teachers and the students, it also has to involve the administrators. And that's week one.
Do you post those?
Do I post what?
Do you have to post them in your classroom somewhere?
Like the learning targets?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have them over there for my 2 classes.
Sure.
I have them for the stats class and then my personal finance. And then all my little presentations, PowerPoints, if I'm using PowerPoints to have them there and explain to them. So week 2, it was focused on setting up a goal. And during this week, we had a couple different learning, reading materials. One of them was a article, how to teach a skill. And one of the main things that I thought was important from there was that a teacher needs, when developing a lesson, a teacher needs to put on the student's shoes and think, what are my students going to struggle with during this lesson? And use that information and embed it in the lesson plan so that that doesn't happen and the students don't get stuck with that. Then we had another article, Get Better at Anything, and that provided a list of the stages that we all need to go through in order to learn a skill. And the funny thing is that the main thing is it has to start with motivation. The students need to be motivated to learn. And to me, that falls into the teacher. The teacher has to motivate them, has to engage them. So we become actors that do all this, so that they can actually be engaged and present in the lesson. They're not just sitting there. And it also talked a little bit more about learning targets. And it was saying that the learning target needs to be specific for the unit and the lesson, and students need to be able to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and see how that is relevant to their life, not just, oh, okay, here we're doing this. Use your phone. Go, turn it on. Okay. No need, oh. And what was I? Oh yes, students need to be able to get their learning target and explain it to somebody else. Say, oh, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it. So I have 2 different ones. I tried to write a learning target. It might not be very good because it's just the 4th week. Hopefully. All right, so we were right here. So this one is one that I think is like an objective. Says students will set up an exponential function to describe the value of a car. So it's very as a teacher or as an administrator, okay, that's the objective for today. But for students, it might not be as clear. And if I do this one instead, we will describe what happens to the value of a car as time goes by. And in order to justify our response, we will use a graph, an equation, and a table of values where we list the value of a car and the time at different years. So to me, that's more specific and the student can actually understand it. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, and it's telling you exactly what you need to use, for example, a graph or an equation, how you're going to justify it using one of those. So if they have questions, that you can refer back to learning target.
Yeah. So hopefully by the end of this class I can do better.
And the language too, it goes from students to we will, so ownership of their own learning.
Right. Let's go to week 3. Okay, so week 3, it basically focused on getting students involved in the assessment process. And the learning process, mainly the assessment. So it was all about rubrics. Why rubrics are important and why we should use them. It basically said that rubrics can help students monitor their own learning, see where they're at, what they need to do in order to demonstrate a success criteria. And one of the video that the professor posted, it showed her class of ninth graders. They were working on a project involving a presentation of a poem, and it was really cool because she got them involved in developing the rubric. So she was going to show them what they needed to do in order to demonstrate that they were successful, that they were mastering the assignment, and they were giving her ideas. Oh, we need to do this, do that. To me, that was like, wow, like, you know, I.
Since the very beginning, they're very involved in the whole
Mhm.
process.
Yeah, so that was very, very cool. And another thing is when the students receive their assignment back, they can see specific feedback as to why they didn't get the grade that they wanted, or what they need to do in order to, you know, get to the learning target. I know one of the other articles that we had to read for this week started with a student saying, "Oh, I thought I got a B on my paper, but I thought that I really deserve an A." So she wanted to ask the teacher, but the teacher couldn't give a specific reason as to why, because there was no rubrics given from the very beginning to say this is what you need to do to get a good grade. Yeah, exactly. And week 4, and this week, let me start right here. So we talked about it focused on lesson design, and one of the videos I've listened by our professor, she gave the specific steps that need to be taken when developing a lesson. She said that we have to start with the standards. If we don't start there, then we're not doing it right. And the very last thing is getting the resources. To me, that was kind of like, okay, because I know some teachers that start right here, and even I did a couple years ago. I would get a resource and be like, oh, this is a great activity. Now, how do I teach this? It's like going the other way, which is totally wrong. We need to start with the standards and then developing the learning targets so that we know where we're going and why we want to get there.
It's very easy to go from 1 to 8.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, me too. But we also talk about the formative learning cycle, which again it models and explains to the students what they need to do to show mastery. And this is mainly during the lesson scaffold, the learning and the goal setting, so that students can self-assess and see where they're at. Then engage in the performance of understanding, which is like an exit ticket, things like that, that let the student know, okay, so I know this, but I still need to work on this. Or like a quiz, or things like that, where the teacher can provide some feedback, and the students can use that feedback to improve on their performance. And that's pretty much it so far.